test, 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 test the mic, test, 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 test.
Hello. Hello, hello. Right, welcome everyone back to the Cryosphere Pavilion. We're about to start the next session. My name's James Kirkham, I'm from the British Antarctic Survey, and I'm one of the early career researchers helping to run this stand this year. The next session will be about how we can fund adaptation efforts to address cascading climate risks in the Hindu Kush Himalaya and other mountain regions. And our speaker will be Deepshika Sharma. I'll hand over. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, and welcome all of you for today's session on how can we fund adaptation efforts to address cascading climate risks in the HKH and other mountain regions. So thanks all of you for joining us today, and also very warm welcome to our esteemed panelists and also our panelists joining online. Just a little bit brief about the event. As we all know that the mountain regions, including those of Hindu Kush Himalaya, face significant challenges due to climate change. As we all call it is HKH. In the HKH, for example, a 2-degree rise and beyond will result in loss of half of the volume of the glaciers and destabilize Asian river systems with enormous downstream consequences for billions of people. Many of these climate risks are cascading. Climate change impact in one country can cascade across one or more to the other national boundaries and affect people's lives and livelihoods in another country. Therefore, the objective of this program is how can we better support the HKH and other mountain regions in responding to the cascading climate risks? What are the various financial mechanisms which are available to address the adaptation needs? Now with this, I would like to call upon Katie Harris, Director Adaptation Without Borders, to give the welcome remarks. Katie, over to you, along with the presentation. Thank you.
Yes, I think so. Okay. Just a minute, everyone. Thank you. Great. All good. Thanks. Hi, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here today. So my name's Katie. I'm Director of the Adaptation Without Borders Global Partnership and also a Senior Policy Fellow at the Stockholm Environment. And I'm going to spend the next 10 minutes or so talking about what cascading climate risks are and some of the challenges in addressing them. And I'm going to aim to convince you of these 3 key points on the screen. So first of all, that we really need to reimagine what we think of as climate risk. Second, that we need to reimagine what we think of as adaptation. And finally, that stronger regional and international cooperation really lies at the heart of enhanced global resilience to the impacts of climate change. You can let me know at the end how well I've done. So first of all, why do we need to reimagine climate risk? So for a long time, national vulnerability and risk assessments have informed our adaptation planning. These usually assess how climate change is projected to impact a country and distill the implications for that same country for domestic adaptation planning. But our national adaptation plans rarely account for risks that cascade into a country from abroad. The problem with this is that we live in an interconnected world where a threat in one place can easily ripple out and cross national borders cascade from one sector to another, or disrupt and destabilize entire global systems and markets. We've seen that more clearly than ever before with the COVID-19 pandemic. Our lives and our livelihoods are increasingly interdependent on one another, and our understanding of climate risk has to evolve for that context. So we're advocating for a much better understanding of what we call cascading climate risks. In other words, how a climate hazard in one place can trigger a cascade of consequences that cross national borders to affect people's lives and livelihoods in another, sometimes many thousands of miles away. So, when climate change damages critical infrastructure, such as international ports, or disrupts international markets and the trade of commodities and goods and services, when it alters international financial flows, such as remittances and investments, or when it impacts on the movement of people, such as tourists or pastoralists or migrants, or when our shared natural resources and ecosystems are depleted, the effects ripple out across the world. So let's just take a quick look at how cascading and cross-border climate risks could impact food security and global trade. So last year, SCI made a first attempt at assessing climate risk for 6 of the world's most traded commodities: rice, wheat, soy, maize, sugarcane, and coffee. This graph here shows predictions for average changes in yields globally for each crop that we've looked at. For 5 out of these 6 crops, we see a projected decrease in yields globally. Now, given that maize, rice, and wheat play a really critical role in achieving global food security, the report underscores that climate change not only creates risks for producing countries, but also for consumers of all kinds, often at significant distances from where these crops are grown. These challenges have really profound implications for markets, for countries, for companies around the world, as well as for our global food security. For example, climate change could lead to a 45% reduction in US production in maize. Such an outcome would likely drive up maize prices worldwide, not only impacting US producers and the American economy, but also consumers all around the world who are really dependent and relying on US grown maize. This then is why we need to reimagine climate risk. It has economic, social, and political consequences. We need to recognize it as global, as systemic, as compound, and as cascading, just as the latest IPCC report acknowledges. And we need to recognize that responsibility for managing just such risks doesn't just lie with environment ministries, but also with trade departments, foreign policymakers, and finance ministries too. These sorts of risks could, for some countries, be much more significant than direct climate risks. So then on to my second point, why must we reimagine adaptation? Well, we all know that for too long and in too many places, adaptation has been too slow, too small in scale, too incremental. While mitigation has been considered a global problem, adaptation has been considered a local one. And while there are very legitimate reasons why adaptation should be locally led, it is naive of us to think that local actors are equipped with the outlets and the information they need, never mind the global mandates to successfully adapt to these risks that are international in nature. We need a reframing of adaptation as the global challenge that the Paris Agreement first articulated it to be. We also need to rethink our assumptions that adaptation is only the concern of developing countries most at risk of experiencing the worst impacts of climate change. Having done the least to cause the climate crisis and with the fewest resources to cope, there is, of course, both a moral case and a humanitarian responsibility and historical responsibility to focus global support on our countries. But our analysis shows that all countries will be exposed to these sorts of cascading climate risks, irrespective of their level of development. And it's in everyone's interest to strengthen the resilience of our global systems to manage them. We also need to recognize that adaptation isn't inherently benign. Just as climate risks can cascade, so too can adaptation actions, creating winners and losers. We see this in the case of export bans, for example, which may be an effective adaptation strategy for a country that is experiencing a decline in agricultural produce due to climate change, but this may redistribute vulnerability rather than reduce it if those who are reliant on that country's exports face increased food insecurity as a result. So our current approaches to adaptation that really shed very little light on how countries might be exposed to climate risks from abroad and in turn export risks to others really need a rethink. And finally, we need to think about adaptation to multiple risks at the same time. There are many interlinked crises facing global governance right now, including war and contested geopolitics, debt and financial insecurity, a food and energy crisis, in addition to the climate and biodiversity crises. We cannot tackle these in silos, so we need to build resilience from a systemic perspective. So now on to my last point, that we need to acknowledge that stronger international and regional cooperation lies at the heart of enhanced global resilience to the impacts of climate change. Given our high levels of global interdependence, we need to act together if we are to create systemic, regional and global resilience. We need a level of regional and global cooperation on adaptation that is currently missing. We need adaptation at greater scales and at all scales through investments in local and national resilience building, through regional cooperation mechanisms and agreements, such as we're seeing emerge in the Hindu Kush, through new coalitions and alliances built on mutual interests in tackling shared risks, and through investments in global policy processes, such as the Global Goal on Adaptation. Effective and just adaptation action could really incentivize new forms of international cooperation. In some cases, greater cooperation on adaptation could lead to a renewal of multilateralism and overcome current divides in the UNFCCC negotiations. And such an approach could reap really large rewards, given that adaptation to a transboundary climate risk in one place has the potential to pay double dividends and increase the resilience of groups living very far apart. So what do we need? So we need better assessments of these cascading climate risks and how they're going to impact our economies, our ecosystems, and our societies. We need greater risk ownership and adaptation responsibility among those beyond the traditional actors, so in trade, finance, and foreign policy ministries. We need more open, more candid, and more coordinated approaches to adaptation. And the pursuit of resilience in one place shouldn't come at the expense of vulnerable communities elsewhere. We need the international community to provide the necessary support for adaptation in countries that lack capacity, and to build robust structures for international cooperation to jointly address these shared risks. And finally, we need forms of climate finance that are effective in tackling them. And that's what we are here to discuss today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Katie. And again, re-emphasizing the need of global regional cooperation, specifically towards the adaptation efforts. It's the need of the hour. Now, moving on to our next presentation, I would like to invite Dr. Arun Bhakta Shrestha, Regional Program Manager, River Basins and Cryosphere EC Mode, to present on what is the significant and concrete cascading climate risks in the HKH. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Katie has very nicely asked the question and answered it as well, right? So, so I guess we don't need to further discuss. What I'm going to do is just give a little bit of concrete examples of what exactly are we experiencing. I think that's the question. What is the significant cascading climate risks in the Hindu-Kush Himalaya region? Now, I'm not going into a lot of detailed background information about what's happening, but just presenting a couple of examples to illustrate what kind of new risks are emerging. So if I may have, okay, this, right. So, but then I think it's also about terminology. Now, what we at EC Mode are using currently is slightly different. So we are talking about one multi-hazard risk, right? That's you in a space, given space, there are different types of hazards happening either simultaneously or in a short time span. That's one. And then the other is there are connects between those hazards, one triggering another one, which we call cascading impacts, right? And then those cascading impacts, cascading risks can actually spill over certain administrative boundaries, which could be international or within a country, provincial or local boundaries. Then we call transboundary risks, right? So I guess it's only the terminology, but what we are talking about is something which we are pretty clear. It's multi-hazard, it is cascading and transboundary. So this is what I'm going to talk about with a few examples, just a few examples. Starting with, okay, let me skip, I have talked about it. Basically, the reason we are here is basically to, enforce our mountain agenda, moving mountains, putting forward the mountain agenda in the forefront, in the center, and also, as in case of cascading risks, talk about how we can finance the actions, right? So, and this is very much related to what we are going to do. This is one example I have shown yesterday also from Nepal. This is Melamchi, right? This is Melamchi, a longitudinal profile along Melamchi River Basin. Is this familiar to you? You have been there, right? You went there. You went to up to that point? No, somewhere in the middle. Okay, good. So this is familiar to you, but not to everyone. So let me explain. In June 2021, we had a big flood in the downstream, and lot of suggestion initially was that there was a gulf in the upstream, and that came down. We quickly looked at our database, and there is no significant lake up there, glacial lake, which can bring that amount of flood. So it was a little bit of puzzle in terms of what has happened. So everybody tried to look at what happened, and then they thought this area, which is an old landslide dammed lake, which had already filled and become a big plain field with sediment, was the source of the flood. But then looking at it, how could a plain field of sediment bring flood, right? I think that was also puzzling. So then we looked at it more carefully. Unfortunately, there are not many meteorological stations over there to give information about precipitation in that area. There is a little bit downstream, there is one which did not show any big catastrophic kind of rainfall. So again, that was a big puzzle. Luckily, we had one research station over there, which was mainly set up to monitor snow, monitor snow cover, but of course, it can also measure the liquid precipitation. And that, when we looked at that data, it was clear the source was not in the middle somewhere, but source was right there at the headwaters. Um, and the amount of precipitation that happened was staggering. For that altitude, which is above 4,000, it's a glacial landform, right? The 24-hour precipitation was around, liquid precipitation was around 100 millimeter, around 90 millimeter, right? So that was very, very interesting and quite surprising. But then what had also happened was that there was a big snowfall event before that. So there was a thick snowpack. The temperature was cold, but then suddenly it warmed and turned into positive temperature. So there was big melt runoff happening. On top of that, there was this 90 millimeter of precipitation. So there was large amount of runoff on a very loose glacial landform. Everyone who knows glacial landform knows it is very loose. It can erode quite rapidly. But then there was a small glacial lake, which was not a potentially dangerous glacial lake, but because of that huge runoff, it was flushed out. So it added to the runoff. So snow melts, heavy precipitation, and glacial outbursts added to that huge amount of runoff, which eroded the surface material. So it was a big debris flow which came down to that landslide dammed place, and it eroded that place also. So that added to the sediment, to the debris, which then becomes more damaging, right? Water with debris becomes more damaging, and then as it went down, it created multiple landslides because of toe cutting of the slope. So big landslide happened. One big one was around Melamchi Gaon, below Melamchi Gaon. It stopped the river. It dammed the river for a certain time. It overflowed the river and then again created flood. So all that happened, and downstream when the settlements are there, it came as a big slurry of water and sediment, right? And then it buried, it was more than 10 meter of debris there and buried house to ground floor or even higher, and toppled many of those houses. So this is in short what had happened. So as you can see, this is what what we call multiple hazards. So many different hazards happen, but also it also had cascading impacts, right? So one hazard actually triggered another one and another one. But of course, it was contained within one national boundary. It did not cross the international boundary. That's one example. So basically, I think this is a very new phenomena for us. At least, having that kind of precipitation, liquid precipitation at that altitude is something which I call is a significant kind of change we are experiencing. And in that year, not only here, in other places also, like in Manang in central Nepal, there was a huge rainfall, more than 200 millimeters within 24 hours, which is unprecedented, right? So that kind of things we are experiencing. Let me go to another example very quickly. This is from India, Uttarakhand. This is popularly known as the Chamoli disaster. Uh, very similar. It had this impacts downstream. You know, heavily impacted settlements, communities, as well as large number of hydropower under construction and in function. But what I want to highlight here is the cause. Again, when it happened, a lot of people indicated, oh, it was a gulf and things like that. But again, there was no big lakes in that part. So it was a puzzle. But then when we realized after studying more closely was there was a big, rock fall from this part called the Ronti Glacier, Ronti Peak. Huge slab of rock around 500-meter wide and around 800-meter tall, just broke off from the mountain and fell more than 1,000 meter. So that fall, you can imagine, is going to be spectacular in terms of fall. The energy. So the question was, where did the water come from? Right, the rock doesn't create flood. So at least some experts within issue mode and others believe that the energy that was released by that huge rock fall was enough to instantaneously melt the huge amount of snow um, on the rock as well as on the surface and beneath, right? So that is one source of water flood. But then on the way, it again eroded the surface material and also eroded some of the water bodies along the stream. So that added to the water and debris, and that's what continued downstream. So again, similar kind of phenomena happened there, but the cause different, right? Again, this is something which reminded us about Seti flood, which happened in 2012, a big puzzle. Uh, Still, Seti, again, what it started with similar kind of phenomena in that the pointer would not work on the screen. Slope. That's where, similar to Uttarakhand, Ronti Glacier, a big slab of rock just fell off, right? This is before and after, not so good, and created huge debris flow and huge flood, which also reached Pokhara city. Again, the question was, where did the water come from? And there were a lot of hypotheses. We wrote a paper on that, giving 4 or 5 hypotheses. Some of them sound very funny now, and yeah, actually, we had to find. The mystery was, where did the water come from? Uh, so now, looking at Uttarakhand, probably the water also had a similar source, but at least the trigger, what happened, is very similar. So the question is the warming, the climate warming, creating instability in mountain peaks at that altitude, which, because of, let's say, permafrost melting, is causing this kind of huge detachment of rock slopes, rock facies, and creating this kind of disaster. At least we have two cases, right? So that's a big question. I think that's something which we really need to be, very serious about. What happens if this kind of phenomena repeats? This is going to be very, very, very difficult. Another example, and that would be the last one I have, is this 2016 Glof, right? Here, I would not say it is multi-hazard kind of example. It's only Glof, but the big thing about it, it is a transboundary Glof. It started in Tibet, but it damaged this hydropower in Vortekoshi very significantly. You can see the level of damage and kind of debris that has been brought up. This is an intake of Vortekoshi. Uh, so it was a transboundary kind of thing, and just it started from a very tiny lake actually in Tibet, right? There are so many much bigger lakes present in Nepal and China. So looking at the scale of damage this tiny lake actually created, if the big lakes burst out, I think that is going to be much, much serious. I'm just going, this is before, I guess, before the Gulf happened, but there are the signs of erosion even before that Gulf of 2016. But if you look at this, so that is, you can see the lake level going down, and also you can see the erosion that had happened, so there is a big lake just next to it, which is called Sirin Machu, which has busted out twice in the past. So this is just an example which we call transboundary, right? So with that, I think I come to my last slide. Um, so as I said, I'm finishing, Dipsika. Um, so so changes are happening. Serious changes are happening. I think that's the question, right? Serious and significant changes are happening. One, the nature of floods in the high mountain, it's changing, of course. I- and the precipitation phenomena I have described, I think this is happening a little bit regularly, which is very concerning. Heavy extreme events in high altitude, which we had not experienced in the past, is happening. That's very concerning. That's one. And again, the example of Chamoli and Seti, rock detachment. Um, if it is related to climate warming, we cannot say for sure, but I think that is a very serious thing as well. That's true. And then, of course, the land use pattern in the Hindu-Kush Himalaya is changing. So the exposure part of the risk is also changing quite rapidly, right? Hydropower, roads, settlements, etc., etc. And as I said, multi-hazard risks are becoming common. Multi-hazards and cascading risks are becoming common, and in many cases, those can be transboundary. So these are becoming very, very common. So I think the question is how to manage those, right? I think this is not something which we are used to. Uh, but then the last thought I would like to put here is, because it is becoming multi-hazard, I think it needs a bit more comprehensive thought in terms of understanding the risk, but also managing the risk. In understanding the risk requires multidisciplinary approach, because it's not only flood, it's not only landslide, it's not only Gulf, it happens simultaneously. So I think different kinds of expertise would be needed to understand it, to understand the risk. But when it comes to managing also, I think it also requires similar kind of integrated approach between physical, science as well as social science, because then when it comes to managing, especially in a cascading context, in a transboundary context, unless we take that approach, I think that will not be complete. So I think in terms of management also, we need to have completely different kind of thought, right? So this is what I would like to present here. Of course, we'll have much more discussion on this from the panel discussion. Thank you, Dipsika. Maybe I should.
Thank you, Dr. Arun, for setting and basically informing what was already we were aware of about the cascading impacts, but the need and that the time is now to work on it. And it is not only the national issues; they are very, very important transboundary issues which needs to be looked into. And now moving on to our next section, which is on the panel discussion, I would like to invite Katie to please be here with us. Katie, you already have been introduced to. And now after that, I would like to invite Ms. Ayman from Adaptation Fund. Ayman Meliane is the adaptation specialist. She is working with project review team at the Adaptation Fund. Now, after that, I would like to invite Mr. Alisher Mahmoud Zahanov, who is Climate Policy and Governance Specialist, Office of Governance Affairs, GCF. And then Mr. Shivang Dorji, Climate Change Specialist from JEF, please, for the panel. And online, we have from EC Mode, Michelle Guertin. She is Head of Business Development and Resource Mobilization at EC Mode. So Michelle is there, I hope. She's joined us online. Okay, okay. So yeah, thank you for joining us. Now moving on to our this section, Since Michelle will be joining us a little late, I'll start with you, Katie, on the question we have for you, basically. Given that the adaptation planning and funding are primarily conducted at the national level, how can we address the cascading climate risks? Over to you. Thank you.
It helps if you turn it on. Me again. Hi everyone. It's really now a delight to be talking about the implications of these sorts of risks for adaptation funding and finance. So today, SEI, the Stockholm Environment Institute, launched a new brief on multilateral adaptation finance for systemic resilience. And I would encourage you all to take a look at it. We found that the vast majority of current adaptation finance addresses the local impacts of climate change only. Around 8% of projects in the GCF, 7% of projects financed by the climate investment funds, and 26% of projects supported by the Adaptation Fund do take a multi-country or regional approach. However, these projects tend to group neighboring countries together for efficiency or administrative reasons. Some tackle shared risks, like similar exposure to drought risk in more than one country, but none tackle these more teleconnected risks that I was talking about earlier, that link countries across greater distances. So in the brief, we distinguish between common risks, so where more than one country faces the same challenge, such as a regional level drought or cyclone, from shared risks resulting from climate impacts that spill over between two countries across a border, such as we heard from Dr. Arun, so the downstream impacts resulting from melting glaciers and landslides, and these teleconnected risks that operate across significant distances, for instance, when they disrupt supply chains and international markets. So we conclude that multilateral funders can and should be doing more to addressing these risks, and that currently there are some significant limitations for tackling these types of risks given current funding models, which we explore a bit more in the brief. But we also find a lot of opportunities. The Adaptation Fund, for example, allows for regional and transboundary projects. Some examples already exist, such as the $9.9 million project on integrated climate resilient transboundary flood risk management in the Drin River Basin in the Western Balkans. So our call, therefore, today is yes to our multilateral funders, but also on applicant countries as well, to experiment more, to design projects that really address transboundary climate risks, to work with their neighbours, to apply for and manage adaptation funds in cooperation, and to work with allies around the world where they face a shared transboundary climate risk to really build regional and global and systemic resilience. Both contributor and recipient countries have incentives to invest in the management of shared climate risks. And we hope that this brief offers a few useful insights on how we can move quickly towards this.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Katie, for that response. Now I would like to request, Michelle is online with us from EC Mode. I would like to request Michelle to share, what are the barriers for the regional intergovernmental organizations like EC Mode to support the HKH countries in securing financing to address transboundary climate risks. Michelle, over to you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Deepshika. Just testing. Can you hear me well?
Yes, we can hear you, but a little, if you can speak a little loud. So.
Sure, I will try my best to speak even with a greater voice from Kathmandu to make sure that it gets there. Excellent. Well, so glad to see all of the panelists here today, and thank you so much for all those who have joined the session, either in person or virtually, and apologies that I couldn't be there in person. Very pleased and honored to be here, and thank you for including me as part of this panel. So when looking at ECMUD is a unique organization which is positioned to serve its 8 country members that are part of the HKH, the Hindu Kush Himalaya region. And ECMUD supports our country members in their efforts to cope with climate and environmental challenges, as noted very well by Arun and Deepshika as part of the introduction. And we also assist them in their national climate and other environmental policies. As a knowledge and innovation hub, we seek to facilitate the exchange and learning and enhance cooperation at the regional level with our member countries to address the significant challenges that the region faces, including cascading climate risk as well defined by Kathy. However, there are a number of barriers that exist for countries of the HKH and others, as well as organizations such as ECMUD, in securing financing to address transboundary climate risk. And for today's session, I'd like to focus on 3 specific ones. The first one is on flow of climate finance. So while looking at current adaptation practices, and as well as noted by Kathy, and also noted in the UNEP 2022 Adaptation Gap Report, we are observing significant increase in the number and the volume of adaptation actions supported through international climate funds. This includes financial support from the Adaptation Fund, from the Green Climate Fund, as well as Global Environmental Facility, which is extremely positive. Super happy to see those numbers. However, as many of you would know, and as reported by the report, the rate is unfortunately insufficient to respond to the adaptation needs of the countries. This financial support, as well as noted by Kathy, is primarily directed at the national level to countries in response to their national adaptation plans. Considering that adaptation is planned at the national level, this makes sense. And it does make sense to see these financial flows following this tendency. However, when considering cascading climate risk, as noted by Kathy, we are missing out on crucial opportunities for positive impacts. That said, we are seeing regional projects and approaches receiving financial support, which will likely advance our efforts in addressing cascading climate risk. For example, the GCF has been encouraging the development of regional programs, and many countries have indeed put together multi-country programs, especially with small island developing states in the Pacific, Indian Ocean, and the Caribbean. Furthermore, the Adaptation Fund has a dedicated program for regional projects. And if you look on their website, there's already 22 projects under the regional program with either implementation or approved. So this brings hope to mountain regions, including the HKH, that financing is available at the regional level if the pitch is right. And ECMUD, working at the regional level on these crucial cascading climate risk, welcomes this trend. On the second point, the complexity of accessing climate funds. And I think all of us understand this quite well, and I'm sure it has already been discussed quite significantly already at COP. The climate finance landscape is quite complex and making accessing different sources of climate finance onerous, particularly to the countries of the HKH. Each sources of funds has its own evolving requirements, modalities, and priorities that have been proven difficult to keep track and to master by countries and small-scale organizations such as ECMUD. Building this understanding and experience requires significant amount of time and resources. And for governments and organizations to prioritize such investments with the limited assurance of securing funds is somewhat and sometimes risky. Linked with this is the region's limited capacity and available human resources to support project development. And to fill these gaps, external capacity is hired to speed up the process with an unfortunately negative impact on building the needed capacity in countries. We note, though, that certain funds have recognized these challenges and are dedicating resources to help clarify the processes and requirements and even build capacity. We're seeing this with the GCF, with their readiness programs, where resources is made available to build capacity, undertake studies, and get local organization accredited. And the final point I would like to mention is that of data limitation. Data limitation when developing project proposal is a barrier. This is mainly seen in building the climate vulnerability case with climatological, environmental, and social economic data knowledge. In addition, we're seeing limited capacity to analyze and interpret the available data to justify the project's climate rationale. Thankfully, organizations like ICIMOD, which I've just joined about 6 months ago, and I'm very proud to be here, can provide this type of information and technical support to the countries of the HKH to fill these gaps, to support with the information, and also identify other data gaps that could be filled through different funding sources. In closing, maneuvering the different sources of climate funds while seeking to build capacity and fill the data gaps is not an easy task to do for countries and organizations like ICIMOD, particularly when developing regional projects where these challenges are multiplied. ICIMOD is dedicated to support our regional member countries in the Hindu Kush Himalaya in securing climate finance. And as a regional accredited implementing entity for the Adaptation Fund, we are very eager to advance with various project ideas. We will, however, look to opportunities to gain lessons and best practices from organizations with previous experiences to ensure that we can position ourselves for success. Thank you again for the opportunity to speak today, and I look forward to the discussion. Thank you, Deepshika. Over back to you.
Thank you, Michelle, for highlighting the limitations and also the barriers, specifically, for example, capacity building, highlighting the need of the data, and the importance of data, again, specifically related to the transboundary issues. Thank you so much for joining us. Now I would like to move to Ms. Ayman from Adaptation Fund. What are the challenges and the opportunities for financially supporting regional adaptation projects? Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you, and good afternoon to you all. I think the previous colleague have already expanded quite a bit on the challenges and the lack of opportunities for funding regional projects and some of the needs that are so unique to address beyond common challenges, because some of the challenges that you said in data and harmonizing and how do you take a regional approach require additional investment that perhaps countries do not want to spend some of their funding allocation towards. And so that's a big part of the reasons why the Adaptation Fund has created this dedicated funding window. It started as a pilot back in 2015 and it was made permanent. And it does have an annual allocation recently it has been consisted of $60 million a year. That given the overall portfolio of the Adaptation Fund, it's quite significant. In addition, and I have to stress this because it's one of the questions that comes, this is outside the country cap. So this is in addition to the recently raised up to 20 million that country can access for regional projects. So regional projects could be done for 2+ country, over 2 countries. We've had regional projects with just 2 countries as a start. We've had regional projects of up to 14 countries. So I think that we've seen a scale, and as you have mentioned, we have about 22 projects currently under implementation in the portfolio. So we've gained quite a bit of experience in that. That window is important, and we have quite a bit of demand on it. And there is also funding to enable project formulation grants, which I think are needed, and we see that. There is also another, it's not fully dedicated regional, but another opportunity to access regional projects through the large innovation window, which is up to 5 million US dollars, and again 2+, and these are dedicated to innovation. And I think that this is important because the innovation window enable, within the fund, it's more risk, has a higher risk appetite, and so the criteria for the projects are slightly different, and we accept a little bit more risk in these innovation projects, which I believe, as we are tackling new risks in with much uncertainty, we need that to play with. So I'm happy to receive questions on more of this, but I think one of the challenges that we have seen in receiving the project is many of the regional projects really struggle with the letters of endorsement. And I think part of it is because the countries think that this is going to reduce their cap. And so let me repeat that again, that the funding for regional project is outside the country cap. Happy to answer question.
Thank you, Ayman. I think that is very, very important point that our member countries and some of the friends are here from the government bodies, that this is over and above the national cap. So please, 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 along with the mode, I think we really need to work on it, on how to tap into this adaptation fund, regional fund. Thank you. Now I would like to invite Mr. Alisher and ask you, are there any existing mechanisms which are already in place to support regional adaptation projects from GC? Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, colleagues. I'd like to start by thanking Simod for inviting us, GCF, here, along with other funds, to provide information on what we do in the region. And specifically, of course, I will come maybe to regional part a bit later, because I want to reflect also on some of the aspects which were mentioned and what support we provide as GCF in some of these activities. First of all, would like to start by saying that as a fund, we are committed to maintain balance in our funding between mitigation and adaptation, 50-50 balance. Right now, we are very close to that. We are at 49% adaptation, 51% mitigation at the grant equivalent terms. And in terms of 8 countries of HKH region, we already have in total 61 projects, 27 of which are projects and programs, and 34 readiness activities, which was also mentioned today in this session. And total funding for 8 countries of HKH from GCF is already reached almost $1.4 billion. And since also water sector is very important for the region, I would like just to mention that we have 12 water projects in the region and total funding of about $650 million. So now coming to the gist of the question about regional projects. So we'd like to say upfront that so far, among all those projects which I mentioned, none of them is regional. However, we definitely encourage countries of the region to consider coming up with joint proposals, joint ideas for projects, because obviously all what we heard today and all the transboundary implications, it requires close coordination and cooperation between countries. Of course, we should also understand that, including the projects which were cited today, they happen, and we have strong regional cooperation when we have a strong basis for this, institutional basis. So, for example, in transboundary water basins, there are commissions for cooperation, and these commissions are the mechanisms that really provide also basis for joint funding proposals, fundraising for joint projects. Talking about maybe some of the examples of regional projects in GCF in other regions, maybe I can provide the example from the Great Green Wall initiative in Africa, in the Sahel region, where GCF has funding supporting Great Green Wall initiative in the countries of more than $1 billion already in 30 projects. And recently, our board has approved a project called iGreenFin, more than 170 million funding through our colleagues in IFAT. They are implementing the projects, which basically will bring together and all the ideas which emanate from different activities that we support in the region of Great Green Wall, and will help cross-fertilize our experiences there. And here I would like to mention also that we work very closely with our JEF colleagues in that region, and as well as elsewhere, and in supporting countries in really addressing especially adaptation challenges in that region, which are huge, of course. I also maybe would like to provide as example of transboundary water cooperation, a project that we support in Central Asia between Tajikistan and Uzbekistan for the RLC basin. It's a 19 million project implemented by the World Bank. And again, in the RLC, as you know, they have also a strong cooperation basis. All 5 countries of the region. There is a joint body for managing and cooperating in the RLC basin, which of course also is conducive to attracting donors. Just in the conclusion, would like to reiterate once again that we encourage countries to come up with regional projects, multi-country projects within our also programmatic approach. So, and hope that the countries of the region will continue to boost their cooperation and come up with new and innovative ideas. Also, maybe one thing that I would like to mention is how we work is through upscaling successful projects, and including with our colleagues from the Adaptation Fund, we have very good examples, and we are now have a new modality how we will continue to do that. So this is also an interesting idea. So if countries already have good projects which produce good results, we could, through our cooperation with our friends from other climate funds, look how we can expand this and to get even more for countries. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Alisher. And specifically, talking about upscaling and as well, So at ECMOD also, we are now looking into a lot of projects which can be looked into upscaling as well as outscaling. And so thank you again. And now I would like to move on to Mr. Shwang Dorchi from Jeff. And my question to you is, how do you see the investment in adaptation projects in HKH? And what approaches Jeff follow for projects on transboundary climate risk? What are the various or different financial mechanisms to leverage these investments in the region? So, yeah, I hope I was audible
I tried. Maybe
Okay.
not just just point me where I go wrong.
Sure. Thank you.
Anyway, thank you very much. It's a pleasure for Jeff to be here, and it's a very interesting event here. I would like to thank Katie as well as Dr. Arun for excellent presentation. On first of all, the outlaying the pathways on the impacts and risks, and then Dr. Arun for bringing it back to the contextualization in the local context. I think this is very useful. Coming back to Jeff, we support adaptation projects, and we have been doing that under a fund called LDCF, it's Least Developed Country Fund. And this is one of those funds created by the COP decisions back in 2001. So this is actually coming up it's 21 years old, coming to 21 years old now. Over the period of last 21 years, Jeff had a lot of success stories in investing in adaptation. And all of those actually happens to be in least developed countries. So it's specifically meant for least developed countries. I think it's important here because we are talking about ECMO. And, it's just not my day job. I actually myself from mountain country. So I know actually the real impacts and what finance would do to transform people's livelihood and building resilience. So I think within the ECMO member countries, we have 5 countries that we have had, privilege of supporting them. And over last years, so we have actually supported them close to $200 million in adaptation projects. And like Ali said, most of these projects happen to be the national projects. But we have also had opportunities to support countries in regional and global projects as well. A matter of fact, we have actually one project right now supporting the entire LDC, supposed to provide, this actually comes back to the point of Michelle, where she mentioned about the difficulties of accessing finance. And we are keenly aware of the difficulties it means, especially when it comes to LDCs, we are aware of the capacity issues that countries face in accessing the finance. And we wanted to support countries in building their own endogenous capacities. We were being advised by countries that it's time around that they build their own capacities within the country. So keeping that in mind, we have regional projects, global projects actually, and we have 4 universities in the region benefiting from this project. We have University of Pokhara in Nepal, University of Afghanistan, Royal University of Bhutan, and then Independent University of Bangladesh. So we have a huge expectations that support that goes beyond countries would be able to catalyze knowledge generations, and then we also have another program called Challenge Program, which is also regional and global in nature. So what it does is actually helps us to de-risk a lot of our investments. So that way, I think we have had a number of successful and interventions so far in the context of regional support as well as national programs. But now coming back to your question again, I think looking ahead, we believe that adaptation isn't important for LDCs. Again, as I said, we serve. I work with LDCF and JEF, and the mandate of the LDCF is to support LDCs. And looking for next 4 years, because we work on a period of cycle called JEF cycle. We just ended 6 months ago, 5 months ago, we ended the previous cycle, which is called JEF 7, and we are in the beginning of the JEF 8 cycle. And then what's happening in the area of adaptation during this next 4 year period, 3.5 years period, is basically that we are going to provide each LDCs, meaning there are 5 LDCs in the region, with the support of $20 million for adaptation. That is a national support, right? What it does allow is that countries can obviously make this as a multi-country project. One of the principles that we have been following is our support is based on the country drivenness. So as long as country wants to package this as a multi-country project, we have no problem in supporting them. As long as it's a country who needs that. That's first one. Second one, I think we're looking at we want to continue this program of the regional and global support. There's a lot of innovation happening. There's a lot of knowledge generations, data sharing, everything that we needed in the domain of climate finance. I think it's very useful. So we are going to continue that. What's going to happen with that is that we're going to have more resources. It's going to be 10% of the overall LDCA portfolio is going to be supporting the regional and global projects. And then we are also earmarking another 10% to do a work on the similar what we call challenge program. That's an innovation program that's actually goes a little bit beyond the traditional way of modality of working. So we have lots of interesting ideas being submitted by various interesting entities, and it goes through a review, and then that's how we decide. So I think my time is really up. I hope I've answered of what I could, but I'm available to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dorji, for those very, very valuable inputs. And again, emphasizing that there are mechanisms in place that how the multi-country can be used, for these projects. These funding mechanisms are in place. And of course, we always say that they are very complex. However, we really need to look into, details of the mechanisms first to understand them, and also from the government's perspective. Thank you. Thank you. So we can take a couple of questions if anyone has. We can. Okay. So we have a question. Please introduce yourself and ask the question.
Thank you very much. Yeah, this is Rabbi from ECMOD. You talked about the process in JIF. What is the future scope? In 2018, there was around only 18 to 20 organization who was like JIF focal organization where JIF used to give them fund. What is the future perspective of JIF to expand this or going directly to government and implement joint project with government, or is there any scope for organizations such as ECMO to be like a focal organization for JIF or in the future? Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, it's for Jeff.
Thank you, Ravi. Excellent question. Thank you very much. So let me explain a little bit of the modalities of how we work. I think it's actually similar with Ali and our colleague from Adaptation Fund. So that's actually applicable same, all right? The way we deliver our support is we deliver through implementing agencies. We call it implementing agencies. What we have in JEF is we have 18 implementing agencies, right? So the way of delivering the support is going to remain same. It's going to be implementing agencies, the 18 implementing agencies. Okay? But let me take one step further. What our policies actually say is we use implementing agencies to deliver the support. Implementing agencies are discouraged to execute the support. So we always have a counterpart in the government or in the region helping us to execute the activities. So when we use 18 agencies, we use as a mechanism to delivering the support, but implementation of the actual activities are never done by those 18 agencies. So there is a kind of little understanding that most people get confused with. So I think we do not actually want them to do any of the execution of the work. Right? It's the same with our two sister funds here, and it has to be an exceptional circumstances. And all we have done so far is encouraged national or regional agencies to execute the project funded by us and implemented by JEF agencies.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Dorji, for that response. Any further questions? Yeah, please.
Hello, Magnus Benzi from the Stockholm Environment Institute. Thanks to ICIMOD for an excellent event, and it's really nice to have all three funds represented, and your encouragement for more regional projects. And I'm optimistic that there will be a lot more regional adaptation projects in the near future. My question is about whether you can imagine international multi-country projects that aren't regional. So some of the risks that Katie spoke about earlier, where you might have countries involved in a supply chain, let's say, that aren't neighbors, but they share a risk. And I wonder, in each three of those funding mechanisms, can you imagine financing projects that are multi-country but not regional? What might be some of the barriers, and do you see it as possible? Thank you.
So since the mic is with me, I'll go and then I'll pass along up. Yeah. Thank you very much. I think I'm not imagining this, and this is actually happening. We have a projects, multi-country projects from different regions of the world coming together and delivering the support. But it has to be, again, I want to go back to the point of what country wants. It has to be determined by the country that they would need that support. And we are absolutely, we welcome such support as long as it makes a difference in climate adaptation for the country. We have done this before, and I think it's something that completely would encourage that.
Yes, I think a very similar situation for GCF. We actually have projects in countries, including adaptation projects, which are not neighbors. But they share a common challenge. For example, we have a global coral reef fund, which was recently adopted. So it's basically focusing on countries where the coral reefs are endangered and where our intervention can really improve the situation. And so this is the common challenge in different parts of the world and different countries. And we have other similar projects of adaptation, but of course, I will not go into mitigation. And mitigation is much easier because the renewable energy, like solar, or you can have in different parts of the world, and supporting them in installing and creating also basically systems for solar installations and feeding them into the grid. So of course we have such projects, but in adaptation too, we have global projects, multi-country projects, which not necessarily in adjacent countries, but which have a common challenge, adaptation challenge.
Well, I think in our case, we have a regional window. We haven't received, I think, partly perhaps because of the upper limit of the project, which is $14 million. But one of the things that I would say, and to your question, is that we have not had the cascading effect, not because we didn't want to, but they were not presenting for us. I think what we've seen here is a very dynamic climate finance landscape. In our perspective, particularly for the adaptation fund, it's demand driven, and we try to respond to the demand. So various of the windows that the adaptation fund has opened recently is because of the demand. So I think the more we receive, some of these are interesting questions to the boards, and the board is reacting to these. So I think, because they don't exist today, that doesn't mean that they won't exist tomorrow.
Thank you. Thank you for that response. Any more questions?
Thank you for the wonderful information that has been shared to us. And my question could be maybe to GC with regard to the encouragement of having regional projects being submitted to GCF for funding. In that regard, I just wanted to know how many countries would constitute as a regional project, one, and if there is any cap that we have kept upon individual member countries, will regional projects have any implications on the individual countries' threshold assigned? That's one question. And two, maybe I'll take this opportunity to ask question probably to Michelle from ISIMOT. And it is with regard to the carbon trading, which otherwise has been also seen as an innovative financing mechanism for adaptation and mitigation purposes. But similar countries, especially like Bhutan and other countries, we lack political and economic might to really operationalize the carbon trading mechanism. Though we might be contributing towards sequestrating million tons of carbon annually, but less the results that I have said it above, we have not been able to really fully operationalize or make use of it. So with this has relevance to, it has regard to the ISMOD's statement earlier that they might be able, or they would contribute towards facilitating the member nations to actually access innovative financing. I was just wondering whether ISMOD or any other intergovernmental organization per se could facilitate full operationalization of carbon trading mechanisms within the member nations or with other countries. Thank you very much.
So I think for the first, Mr.
Yeah, I didn't maybe catch the entire question because of the sound noise coming from this side. But I think the question is how many countries should be there to a project to be considered regional? Okay. So basically for us, 2 countries is already a multi-country project. So 2 countries is enough, basically. Again, it's important to have a clear basis for the project, right? So climate basis, climate information basis, and climate science basis. So if you have a good justification why it's important for 2 countries to work on a project, if you have a good justification for climate impact potential, adaptation potential, or mitigation potential. And you can clarify, or accredited entity which is applying for funding, submitting funding proposal, it's important for us to see that. So if it's only 2 countries and they have the clear basis for the projects and justification for the project, it's enough. Or if it should be 3, 4, and so on. So again, it's all case on case by case basis, and depending on what is actually the essence of the project, and what are the challenges that it needs to address, adaptation challenges, and vulnerabilities that we need to address. So, okay. And the second question, I think.
Thank you. Thank you. Michelle, I hope you were able to hear the question. So please, over to you, Michelle.
Thank you, and thank you so much for that question. Quite an interesting question. So ICIMAD is not. I'm somewhat still quite new to the organization, and maybe everyone and Deepshika who are there can probably look at any of the past experience that we've had. I do not think that we've dealt with carbon trading in the past. However, we are looking at different types of climate financing that we could potentially support the countries of the HKH in addressing the climate risk and adaptation needs. And so are open to conversations and to look at different opportunities. And so would welcome the opportunity to have those types of conversations with country governments and national organizations to support that. So that's unless maybe Deepshika has something to complement my answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. So yeah, we have Dr. Babar.
Yeah, thank you, Deepshika. I'm really glad to see that all the funding mechanisms are keen to start some regional projects. But from Arunji's very elaborative presentation, I got the feeling that the cascading risks are only about water. So I need a clarification from you. And what other themes and areas could qualify as cascading risk? Like if I give you some examples, air pollution is the other. It can have an origin in one country, but can impact many countries in the region. For instance, the smoke, uh, because of the burning of agricultural residues and other things in both Punjab, South Pakistan, and India, have been impacting in the entire region. The pollution is now, ascending to the mountains, it's causing elevation and other issues. Similarly, related to biodiversity, like the transfer of diseases, we have seen the COVID-19 from one country to the other, and trade, for instance, could be the third example. So I need a clarification that will these themes can qualify to be considered as a sort of shared, common, interconnected risks for your funding mechanisms that we could consider to go for one of these in the future. Thank you.
Again, since I have the mic, and then maybe we give to colleagues. Air pollution, right? I heard it right. Indeed, a transboundary also phenomenon. And if I may, I worked before in my life professionally in the secretariat of the European Convention on Long-Range Transboundary Air Pollution, CLR-TAP. So in Europe, they realized already in 70s that this is a transboundary phenomenon, and they have to come something. And they adopted the convention in 1979, the Convention on Long-Range Transboundary Air Pollution. However, of course, we should understand that we are climate funds. I think I can speak for all 3 of us. So every project that you have should have a climate basis and climate potential. So it should be linked to climate change and how we tackle its impacts in mitigation or adaptation, in our case, work in mitigation. So if it's purely the project is organized and presented as an air pollution project to reduce air pollution, to tackle the pollution, it most probably will not have a lot of chances to get funding. However, we should understand that many climate change projects, they have co-benefits in improving air pollution. in reducing air pollution and improving air quality. For example, transportation projects, energy projects. So whenever we can basically replace an old coal-fired power plant by solar energy or wind energy, we're actually reducing air pollution. Again, if you look, if we reduce solar stoves instead of coal in villages, solar cooking stoves, for example. Again, it improves also local air pollution situation and has also a potential transboundary. In transportation, I don't have to explain. Every car, polluting car replaced, or a fleet of buses, and we have such projects. We're already investing. For example, recently there was a project in India, a big project adopted in GCF, which will help in many Indian countries upgrade the public buses fleets to electric vehicles, which will of course improve situation. So this is basically how you should package projects that will have co-benefits in reducing air pollution, but they should be climate projects.
I think for us, it's not only climate, but has to be adaptation focused. So because we only focus on adaptation. In the thematic areas, we do have 3 that are dedicated. The regional projects have to fit within 3 thematic areas, which are food security, disaster risk reduction, and water management. Because these are the 3 that we saw that really would require more of a regional approach. In the national projects, we do not impose any thematic area, but in the regional one, these are the 3 that are currently. And I totally agree with my GCF colleague that it has to have a very clear adaptation lens, be very clear about the challenge and the risk that needs to be addressed, and how the solutions finally address that.
Yeah, just to build on that, I think what remains for us as well is the adaptation. So adaptation for the people has to be a front, back, and the center of the page. That's it. It's essential for us to look at the adaptation aspects. And in terms of thematic, what we are looking at is we are looking at food and agriculture, we are looking at water, we are looking at nature-based solution, and we are also looking at climate information services. So those are the 4 major thematic areas we are looking at. But we are aware that countries could demand for another thematic areas related to climate adaptation, and we are happy to do that. We are happy to support that too. Your question on cascading, as Jeff, we do not have agreed taxonomy or views on what should be called cascading. I think IPCC report does discuss this quite a lot on the cascading. I looked at your description of cascading, and I think what I'm trying to say is there are, I think, number of range of ways people trying to look at cascading. So we as long as we try to reduce the risks of the climate change, that's where we fit in. So we are not in the process of being very strict on what should be cascading. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And now, considering the paucity of time, we cannot have any more questions. Maybe you can discuss it bilaterally later. So moving on to our next section, I would like to invite Katie Harris for giving the closing remarks. Katie, over to you. And also vote of thanks. Katie, thanks.
Thanks so much. So I have the unenviable task of trying to summarize in about a minute what has been a really rich and interesting discussion. 3 key takeaways for me from this. So first of all, as Dr. Arun summarized earlier, that multi-hazard risks with cascading impacts are becoming more frequent. And this is certainly the case in the Hindu Kush Himalaya. It's also the case in other parts of the world. And this creates demand for an integrated approach to risk management, but also more regional and global approaches to adaptation planning. The second point is that we've heard some really compelling examples from the Adaptation Fund, GCF, and the GEF around some of the regional projects that are already existing, particularly to address these common or shared climate risks between countries that share a border. And we've also heard about some of the opportunities that exist within these mechanisms for more of these projects in the future. But we've also discussed some of the barriers, some of them real, some of them perceived, that we really have to overcome. And this requires all of us to work together to overcome some of these barriers. And my third point is, so I'm based with SEI, but we're working very closely with ICIMOD and a number of partners around the world on Adaptation Without Borders, which is this global partnership to try and better manage the cascading impacts of climate change and to encourage more regional and global cooperation on adaptation. And I would say we're all agreed that we need more adaptation across borders. But this also requires that funding crosses borders too. And as we've heard, that this requires countries being willing to come together, to really work together and cooperate on adaptation. And it requires some of the funding mechanisms to create the incentives for those countries to do so and to make it as easy as possible. So from a partnership perspective, on behalf of everyone at ICIMOD and others in the Adaptation Without Borders partnership, I would just like to extend a real vote of thanks to all of the speakers here today and to all the staff at ICIMOD for organizing such a fantastic event. And we really look forward to working with you all in the future to strengthen resilience to these risks.
Thank you, Katie. And I would like to thank everyone and Michelle as well for joining online. Just we would like to have before closing a group photo. So Michelle, please be there. Dr. Arun, please. Dr. Babar. No, they'll take, you can stand. Yeah. Thank you, Michelle.
Test the mic, test. Test the mic, test. Shits the mic, test. Test the mic, test. Test the mic, test. Test the mic, test. Test the mic, test. Test. Test the mic, test. Test the mic, test. Test the mic, test. Test the mic, test. Test. Test mic, test. Test mic, test mic, test mic, test mic, test mic.